The dust storms on Meridian Station never stopped. Commander Zekthar watched the red clouds roll across the wasteland through the reinforced windows of the command center. His crystalline skin reflected the warning lights that blinked across the tactical displays. 300 cycles of war against the Vrath, and still they came. Wave after wave of chittering nightmares that consumed everything in their path. Zekthar stood 3 meters tall, his body covered in natural armor that could stop plasma rounds. His people, the Chromath, had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill you. They were warriors born and bred. Around him stood representatives of a dozen other species, each deadly in their own way. The Thraxians with their acid blood that melted through metal. The Vulcan, who could regrow lost limbs in hours. The Korthi, with 4 arms that moved faster than the eye could follow. Then the humans arrived. Zekthar watched their transport ship land through the storm. It was small, barely large enough for 50 individuals. When the boarding ramp lowered, he saw them for the first time. They looked fragile, small compared to most Coalition species. Their bodies were covered in simple combat armor that seemed almost primitive next to the advanced shielding other races used. They carried both energy weapons and something called projectile rifles that fired metal bullets. Actual metal bullets, like something from ancient history. Captain Jake Morrison led them into the command center. He was average height for a human, with brown hair and tired eyes that had seen too much fighting. He saluted Zekthar with a sharp precision that spoke of military discipline. 40 soldiers reporting for duty, Commander, Morrison said. His voice was calm and steady. Zekthar had requested reinforcements and received 40 humans. He tried not to show his disappointment. Still, orders were orders. He assigned them to rear support positions, places where their obvious physical limitations would not get them killed immediately. The humans accepted their assignments without complaint. The Vrath attacked 2 days later. Zekthar had fought the Vrath many times before. They came in swarms, thousands of them pouring across the wasteland like a living tide. Each one stood as tall as a human, covered in black chitinous armor, with mandibles that could bite through bone and claws that dripped with paralyzing venom. They felt no fear. They took no prisoners. They existed only to consume and spread. The battle began at dawn. Sensors detected movement 5 kilometers out, then 3 kilometers. Then they were at the walls. The Coalition forces opened fire with everything they had. Energy weapons carved burning paths through the Vrath ranks. Artillery shells exploded among them. The Korthi warriors moved along the battlements with fluid grace, their 4 arms working 4 weapons simultaneously. But the Vrath kept coming. They climbed over their own dead without hesitation. They threw themselves at the defensive positions with mindless fury. Zekthar saw 3 of his best Thraxian warriors pulled down by the swarm. Their acid blood killed dozens of Vrath, but there were always more to take their place. Then he heard something strange. Laughter. The humans had abandoned their rear positions and charged forward into the thickest part of the fighting. They moved in tight groups, covering each other with disciplined fire. Their projectile weapons made a distinctive crack, crack, crack sound that cut through the roar of battle. Not the nervous laughter of fear, but genuine amusement, as if they were enjoying themselves. Zekthar watched Lieutenant Amy Clark throw herself at a Vrath warrior twice her size. She emptied her rifle into its face, then drew a knife when the gun ran dry. The Vrath's claws tore into her armor, gouging deep cuts that leaked blood. She ignored the wounds and kept stabbing until the creature stopped moving. Then she stood up, reloaded her weapon, and moved to the next target. Sergeant Kyle Bennett took a Vrath claw to the leg. The appendage was severed below the knee, blood spurting from the wound. Any sane being would have retreated to medical care. Bennett propped himself against a piece of debris, applied a tourniquet with quick, practiced movements, and continued firing his weapon. He was making jokes over the communication channel about finally having an excuse to skip morning exercise routines. He killed 17 Vrath before a medic forcibly dragged him away from the fighting. The humans did not have regeneration. They could not regrow lost limbs like the Vulcan. They did not have armor-plated skin like the Chromath. Their bodies were soft and vulnerable, and the Vrath claws cut them easily. But they refused to stop fighting. Even when wounded, even when bleeding, they kept shooting, kept moving forward, kept killing. One human, Private Nick Hayes, had his arm broken by a Vrath swipe. Zekthar watched through the command center cameras as Hayes grabbed the broken arm with his good hand, pulled it straight with a sharp motion that must have been agonizing, and then used his rifle one-handed while the broken arm hung useless at his side. His face showed pain, but he kept fighting. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, the ground outside the walls was carpeted with Vrath bodies. The coalition had held, but barely. Zekthar had lost 30 warriors from various species. The humans had lost 8 dead and 12 critically wounded. More than half their force was either dead or injured. By any reasonable assessment, they had been devastated. Yet when Zekthar went to check on the survivors, he found them cleaning their weapons and checking ammunition supplies, preparing for the next attack. Captain Morrison was bandaging his own arm, wrapping clean cloth around a deep cut with calm efficiency. Several other humans sat nearby, some with bandages, some with obvious limps, but all of them alert and ready. "Your species is either insane or ignorant of mortality," Zekthar said to Morrison. The captain looked up and grinned. There was blood on his teeth from a cut inside his mouth. "We know exactly how fragile we are, Commander. Humans break easy. We die easy. That's why we don't waste time being afraid. Fear doesn't stop the bleeding or kill the enemy. Action does." Zekthar examined Morrison's wound. It was deep enough to require medical attention. "You should be in the medical bay." "I will be in a minute," Morrison replied. "Just wanted to make sure my people were accounted for first." He finished tying off the bandage and stood up, testing his arm's range of motion. "We'll be ready for the next wave, Commander. Just point us at the enemy." That night, Zekthar reviewed the battle recordings. He watched the humans fight again and again, studying their tactics and behavior. They moved with precision and discipline, but also with a reckless aggression that should have gotten them killed. They covered each other's positions, called out targets, coordinated their fire. When one fell, the others immediately moved to protect the wounded and continue the fight. What struck him most was their absolute refusal to give up. He had seen warriors of many species fight bravely. He had seen last stands and heroic sacrifices. But he had never seen anything like the humans. They fought as if surrender was not even a concept they understood, as if the only two options were victory or death, with no middle ground. The Thraxian lieutenant who had fought beside the humans stopped by Zekthar's office. Her name was Cyrax, and she was a veteran of 200 battles. "The humans are strange," she said. "They took wounds that would have sent my warriors to medical care, and they kept fighting. I saw one of them lose fingers to a Vrath bite. He picked up his weapon with his remaining hand and continued shooting. I do not understand them." Zekthar looked at the tactical display, at the markers showing human positions. 40 soldiers, now 32 able-bodied, with 8 dead and waiting for new reinforcements. Such a small number. But they had killed more Vrath per capita than any other unit in his command. "I do not understand them either," he admitted, "but I am beginning to think we should try." 3 weeks passed since the first battle. The Vrath attacked twice more, and both times the humans fought with the same fierce determination that had shocked Zekthar initially. He found himself watching them during the quiet moments between battles, trying to understand what made them different. Corporal Lisa Grant sat in the armory one evening, maintaining her weapon with careful attention. Zekthar approached, his heavy footsteps announcing his presence. Grant looked up and nodded in greeting, then returned to her work. "May I ask you something?" Zekthar said. "Of course, Commander. Your species is not physically superior to the Vrath. You lack natural armor or enhanced healing. Yet you fight them without hesitation. Why?" Grant set down her cleaning cloth and considered the question. "We're not the strongest species, Commander. Not even close. On Earth, our homeworld, we're not even in the top 10 most dangerous things. But we're the only species that hunted everything else. We decided we were going to be at the top of the food chain, and we made it happen through sheer stubbornness." She pulled up a holographic display from her personal datapad. Images appeared in the air between them. Zekthar saw humans swimming in oceans alongside massive creatures with rows of teeth. Humans climbing mountains in conditions that would freeze most species solid. Humans diving to ocean depths that should have crushed their fragile bodies. "These creatures are called sharks," Grant explained, pointing to one image. "They're perfect predators, been around for millions of years. Humans swim with them for fun. These mountains, the temperature can drop low enough to kill you in minutes. Humans climb them because they're there. This," she showed an image of a human handling a serpent-like creature. "Venomous snake. One bite can kill you. Some humans keep them as pets." "Your people seek out danger deliberately?" "We do," Grant confirmed. "We eat foods that are literally toxic because we like the burning sensation. We jump out of aircraft for recreation. We box, which means we hit each other repeatedly until someone falls down, and we call it sport." She smiled. "Pain is just data, Commander. You acknowledge it, process it, and move on. It tells you something is wrong, but it doesn't control you unless you let it." Private Nick Hayes joined the conversation, his broken arm now properly set and in a support brace. "Showed him the Earth videos?" he asked Grant. "Just getting started," she replied. Hayes pulled up another set of images. "Commander, let me tell you about human history. For most of our existence, we were prey animals. Things bigger and stronger than us wanted to eat us. We survived by being smarter and more stubborn. We learned to work together, to use tools, to adapt. We weren't born as apex predators. We made ourselves into them." The images showed ancient humans hunting enormous beasts with primitive spears. They showed humans building civilizations in hostile environments, from frozen wastelands to scorching deserts. They showed humans surviving disasters that wiped out other species. "We almost went extinct a few times," Hayes continued. "Ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, plagues that killed millions. But we survived. And every time we survived something that should have killed us, we came back stronger and more determined." Over the following days, Zekthar learned more about humanity. He discovered they had spent much of their history fighting each other in brutal wars. They had developed weapons specifically designed to kill other humans, then turned those same weapons on any threat they encountered. They had a saying, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger." They seemed to live by it. Major Greg Sullivan called a planning meeting for a raid on a Vrax supply depot. The target was heavily defended, deep in enemy territory. Coalition intelligence estimated at least 5,000 Vrath warriors guarding the depot. The supplies stored there could feed Vrath forces for months. Destroying it would severely hamper their operations in this sector. Sullivan proposed a plan. Zekthar listened with growing disbelief. "We go in loud," Sullivan explained, marking positions on the tactical map. "My team hits the front entrance with everything we have. Explosives, heavy weapons, maximum noise and chaos. We make them think it's a full-scale assault, while every Vrath in the depot is focused on us. The real strike team comes in from the opposite side, plants charges on the supply stores, and extracts before the place goes up." "Your team would be torn apart," Zekthar protested. 5,000 Vrath against 15 soldiers? That is not a battle. That is suicide." Sullivan shrugged. "Probably, but we only need to hold their attention for about 45 minutes. We can do that." 3 coalition commanders immediately rejected the plan. Too risky, too likely to fail, too many casualties for minimal gain. Sullivan listened to their objections calmly, then turned to Sekthar. "Commander, with respect, this is what humans do. We take the impossible missions because someone has to, and we're good at it. Let us do our job." Against his better judgment, Sekthar approved the plan. He told himself it was because the strategic value outweighed the risk. But, truthfully, he wanted to see if the humans could actually do what they claimed. The raid launched at midnight. Sullivan's team hit the front entrance with explosive force. Rockets and grenades tore into the Wrath defenses. The humans advanced, firing continuously, their weapons creating a wall of sound and fury. The Wrath responded exactly as predicted, pouring forces toward the attack. Sekthar monitored from the command center, watching multiple video feeds simultaneously. Sullivan's team fought like demons. They used every piece of cover, every tactical advantage. When the Wrath tried to flank them, the humans adapted instantly, shifting positions and creating new defensive lines. Private Danny Cole took a Wrath claw to the chest. The wound was serious, bleeding heavily. He stuffed the wound with medical foam from his kit, took a stimulant injection, and kept fighting. He lasted another 12 minutes before blood loss forced him down. His teammates dragged him to cover while maintaining suppressing fire. Sergeant Beth Torres had her rifle destroyed by a Wrath strike. She switched to her sidearm without missing a beat, shooting with cold precision. When that ran dry, she picked up a fallen Wrath weapon and used it, even though the alien design was awkward in human hands. The strike team completed their mission in 43 minutes. They planted charges throughout the supply depot and began their extraction. Sullivan's team had held the Wrath attention perfectly. Now they needed to escape before the charges detonated. They almost made it. A Wrath patrol cut off their retreat route. Sullivan took a claw to the side, a piece of chitin breaking off and embedding itself in his chest, dangerously close to his heart. He looked down at the wound, then up at his team. "Keep moving," he ordered. "I'll slow them down. No one gets left behind." She grabbed Sullivan and hauled him along, even as he protested that he was slowing them down. 2 other soldiers provided covering fire, walking backward while shooting, a maneuver that should have been impossible under combat conditions. They reached the extraction point with 90 seconds to spare. The transport lifted off just as the charges detonated. The entire supply depot went up in a massive fireball visible from orbit. Secondary explosions continued for hours as stored ammunition and fuel cooked off. Of Sullivan's 15-person team, 7 survived. Sullivan himself was in critical condition, the piece of Wrath chitin still embedded in his chest because removing it during the fight would have caused fatal bleeding. The medical team extracted it carefully, millimeter by millimeter, over 3 hours of delicate surgery. Sekthar visited Sullivan in the medical bay afterward. The Major was conscious but weak, connected to various monitoring devices that beeped steadily. "Why did you volunteer your people for that mission?" Sekthar asked. "You knew the odds. You knew most of you would not survive." Sullivan's answer came slowly, his voice rough from pain medication. "Because it needed to be done, Commander, and we were the best choice for the job. Humans have been doing impossible things since before we left Earth. We climbed mountains because they were there. We sailed across oceans not knowing what was on the other side. We went to space when people said it was impossible. This mission," he managed a weak smile, "this was just another Tuesday for us." Sekthar left the medical bay with much to think about. The humans had lost 8 soldiers in that raid, 8 lives for a supply depot. By cold strategic calculation, it was an acceptable trade. But the humans mourned their dead with genuine grief, holding a memorial service where each fallen soldier was remembered by name, their stories told, their sacrifices honored. They valued life intensely, yet they were willing to spend it without hesitation if the cause was worthy. It was a contradiction that Zekthar struggled to understand. How could they care so much and risk so much at the same time? He was beginning to realize that understanding humans might be the key to winning this war. The war spread like fire across the galaxy. The Vrath launched their largest offensive yet, targeting 6 coalition worlds simultaneously. Each world held billions of lives. Each world was vital to the war effort. High Command scrambled to respond, spreading forces thin across multiple fronts. Humanity's contribution remained small in raw numbers. They simply did not have the population to match species that had colonized hundreds of worlds. But Zekthar found himself requesting human units for every critical operation. They had become specialists in what other species considered impossible missions. The request came through official channels, marked urgent and classified. A Vrath hive ship had been detected in the outer reaches. These vessels were massive, 3 times the size of coalition cruisers, carrying tens of thousands of Vrath warriors and serving as mobile breeding centers. Standard doctrine was to destroy them from a distance with concentrated fire from multiple ships. Boarding a hive ship was considered suicide. But this particular hive ship carried something special. Coalition intelligence had intercepted communications suggesting it held complete data on Vrath military deployments across 4 sectors. That information could turn the tide of the war. The problem was that hive ships had quantum-encrypted systems that could not be accessed remotely. Someone had to go inside and physically retrieve the data. Lieutenant Commander Data Phillips volunteered. She was a naval officer, specialized in boarding actions and close-quarters combat. She had brown eyes that seemed to see right through people, and a reputation for completing missions that others thought impossible. "I need 50 Marines," she told Zekthar during the briefing. "Good ones who can think on their feet. The inside of a hive ship is not like normal vessels. Gravity shifts randomly. The corridors are designed for creatures that can cling to any surface. The Vrath will fight for every meter. It will be ugly." Zekthar pulled up the hive ship scans. "Our intelligence estimates between 8 and 12,000 Vrath warriors inside. You cannot fight through those numbers." "We don't plan to," Phillips replied calmly. "We go in fast, hit the data core, extract the information, and get out before they can organize a proper response. Speed and surprise are our weapons." She selected her team carefully. 50 human Marines, each one a veteran of multiple combat operations. They trained for 2 days, practicing in mock-ups of Vrath ship interiors, learning to fight in shifting gravity and cramped spaces designed for alien physiology. The boarding action launched during a small fleet engagement. Coalition ships engaged the hive ship, drawing its attention and defensive fire. While the Vrath focused on the external threat, Phillips and her Marines breached the hull through a weak point identified by tactical scans. They entered a nightmare. The interior of the hive ship was organic and mechanical, mixed together in disturbing ways. Walls pulsed like living tissue. The air was thick with the smell of decay and alien chemicals. Gravity reversed without warning, sending Marines tumbling until they adapted and learned to move carefully, always keeping one hand on a surface. The Vrath came in waves. Phillips led her team through corridor after corridor, fighting room-to-room combat against enemies that had every advantage. The Marines moved in tight formation, covering each other's positions, calling out threats, adapting to the impossible environment. Corporal Carl Brooks was point man for his squad. He moved with careful precision, weapon ready, checking corners before advancing. A Vrath warrior dropped from above, pinning him to the floor. Its mandibles snapped toward his throat. Brooks did not scream or struggle. He reached to his belt, grabbed a grenade, activated it, and held it between himself and the Wrath. The explosion killed them both. It also collapsed the corridor behind them, creating a choke point that slowed the Wrath pursuit and gave Brooks' squad precious seconds to escape. His teammates mourned him, but kept moving. They had a mission to complete. Sergeant Holly Mitchell led a demolition team tasked with creating diversionary explosions. She placed charges with expert care, timing them to go off in sequence and draw Wrath forces away from the main team's route. A Wrath patrol caught her team by surprise. Acid spray from a Wrath weapon hit Mitchell's left arm, eating through armor and flesh. The arm fell away, leaving a smoking stump. Mitchell did not pass out. She grabbed the injury with her remaining hand, applied a tourniquet, injected herself with pain medication and stimulants, and continued directing her team's movements. She coordinated their positions, called targets, and maintained tactical awareness, even as shock tried to drag her under. Team 2, advance to Junction 7, she said over the comm, her voice steady, despite what must have been agonizing pain. Team 3, cover the left flank. Charges detonating in 30 seconds. Be ready to move. She stayed conscious until her team reached the extraction point. Only then did she allow herself to collapse, her job complete. Phillips reached the data core 18 hours after the boarding action began. 18 hours of constant fighting through alien corridors against overwhelming numbers. Of the 50 Marines who began the mission, 23 remained combat effective. The rest were dead or too wounded to continue. The data core was a massive biological computer, pulsing with strange light. Phillips connected her equipment and began the download. It would take 10 minutes to copy everything. 10 minutes where her team had to hold position against the entire Hive ship's population. The Wrath came in a flood. Hundreds of them, pouring through every entrance, climbing walls and ceiling, attacking from all directions simultaneously. The Marines formed a defensive circle around Phillips, firing in all directions. They used every trick they had learned, every tactic that had kept them alive so far. Private Ethan Walsh stood at one of the entrances, firing his weapon in controlled bursts. When his rifle overheated and failed, he drew his sidearm. When that ran empty, he drew his knife. When a Wrath knocked the knife from his hand, he used his fists, punching the creature's eyes until it released him. Then he retrieved his knife and continued fighting. Lieutenant Jack Murphy coordinated the defense with calm precision. Sector 3 needs support. Sector 1, shift 2 Marines over. Watch the ceiling. They're coming from above. Good kill. Good kill. Sector 4, fall back 3 meters. Use the narrow corridor for a choke point. The download completed. Phillips disconnected her equipment and shouted, "We've got it! Extraction! Now!" The retreat was brutal. The Marines fell back in stages, each group covering the others, fighting for every meter. They left their dead behind, a decision that tore at them, but was necessary for the mission's success. The Wrath followed, relentless and endless. The extraction ship met them at the breach point. The Marines poured through the opening, diving into the transport bay, even as Wrath claws reached for them. The ship sealed its doors and blasted away from the Hive ship, weapons firing to keep Wrath pursuit craft at bay. 23 Marines returned from 50. Phillips sat in the transport bay, covered in alien blood and her own, the data core's contents safely stored in her equipment. She looked at the survivors, at their wounds and exhausted faces. "We did it," she said quietly. "We got the information. Now let's make sure it was worth it." The intelligence from the Hive ship proved invaluable. It revealed Wrath fleet positions, supply routes, and strategic plans. Coalition forces used the information to launch a counteroffensive that drove the Wrath back in 3 sectors. Zextar attended the memorial service for the 27 Marines who died in the boarding action. The humans gathered in a large bay, standing in formation, while Captain Morrison read each name aloud. After each name, someone who had served with the fallen Marine would tell a story, share a memory, speak about who that person had been beyond just a soldier. "We don't leave anyone behind," Phillips told Zekthar after the service. "But sometimes we have no choice. So we make sure their sacrifice means something. We make sure they're remembered. Every name, every story, every life that was given. That's the promise we make to our soldiers." Zekthar was beginning to understand the human approach to war. They valued life so highly that they mourned every death with genuine grief. But they valued the cause they fought for so highly that they would spend those lives without hesitation if it meant protecting others or achieving the mission. It was a paradox that made them uniquely dangerous. Most species balance survival against mission success. The humans seemed to believe that both were equally important, and they would fight until either they succeeded or died trying. There was no middle ground, no acceptable failure, no surrender. The Vulcan, with their rapid reproduction, considered individual soldiers expendable. The Chromath prized glory in death and accepted casualties as the price of war. The humans mourned every loss, while simultaneously being willing to become those losses if necessary. "We are not fearless," Morrison explained to Zekthar one evening. "We feel fear like any other species, but we learned long ago that fear is just another piece of data. You acknowledge it, understand what it's telling you about the danger, and then you act anyway, because the mission matters more than your comfort." Zekthar looked at the human captain with new understanding. "You have turned vulnerability into strength. You know you are fragile, so you fight harder. You know you can die, so you make every action count." "Exactly," Morrison agreed. "We're not monsters, Commander. We're just stubborn humans who refuse to quit." After the Hive ship mission, High Command assigned Zekthar to work directly with human military leadership. The Coalition needed to better understand these strange warriors, how to use them effectively, how to integrate their tactics with other species. Zekthar accepted the assignment with genuine interest. The humans fascinated him more than any enemy he had ever fought. He found himself in a briefing room deep inside Coalition headquarters, sitting across from Admiral Kevin Roberts. The Admiral was the highest-ranking human in the war effort, a gray-haired man with lines etched deep into his face from years of command decisions. He was reviewing casualty reports on a datapad, and his expression showed clear pain. "You mourn them?" Zekthar observed. It was not a question. Roberts looked up, tired eyes meeting Zekthar's crystalline gaze. "Every single one. I know their families, what they wanted to do after the war, what dreams they had." He set down the datapad carefully. "Does that surprise you, Commander?" "It contradicts your actions," Zekthar said, keeping his tone neutral. "You send your people into situations where death is nearly certain. You accept casualties that other species would consider catastrophic. Yet you grieve when they die. I do not understand the contradiction." Roberts nodded slowly, as if he had expected this question. "Let me tell you about human history, Commander. May I show you something?" He activated a holographic display. Earth appeared, rotating slowly in the air between them. It looked beautiful from space, blue and green and white, peaceful and calm. "For most of our existence," Roberts began, "humans were prey. We were food for things bigger and stronger than us. There were creatures on our world, with claws and teeth, designed specifically to kill primates like us. We survived because we formed groups, because we protected each other, because a human alone was weak, but humans together were unstoppable." The display changed, showing images of ancient Earth, humans huddled in caves, hiding from predators, humans working together to hunt animals many times their size, humans building fires and tools and shelters. "We had to cooperate to survive," Roberts continued. "We developed complex social structures. We learned to communicate, to plan, to think beyond the immediate moment. Our intelligence became our weapon, because we didn't have claws, or armor, or venom. We had each other." The images shifted to show human conflicts, battles and wars, cities burning, soldiers fighting. Zekthar saw primitive weapons and advanced ones, hand-to-hand combat, and long-range bombardment. The scale of human violence against other humans was staggering. "We spent millennia fighting each other," Robert said, his voice heavy. "Terrible, brutal wars over resources, beliefs, territory, perceived differences. We nearly destroyed ourselves dozens of times. The death toll across our history numbers in the billions. We got very, very good at killing because we practiced on each other for thousands of years." He paused, letting that sink in. "But we learned something from all that death. We learned that our strength is not in our individuals, it's in our collective will. Every human culture, across every continent, develops stories about heroes who sacrifice themselves for others. It's built into us at a fundamental level." Lieutenant Maya Scott entered the briefing room, carrying additional reports. She was young, barely 30 years old, but her eyes held the same tired wisdom that Robert's did. She had seen combat, lost friends, made the hard choices that war demanded. "I had a great-grandmother who survived something called the Second World War," Scott said, joining the conversation. 80 million humans died in 6 years. 80 million. Our entire current population in this war effort is only 12 million. She told me stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, not because they were heroes or special, but because it was necessary. She pulled up additional historical records, images of humans performing impossible feats during wartime, medics running into fire to save wounded soldiers, civilians hiding refugees from genocidal regimes, soldiers throwing themselves on explosives to save their squads. Again and again, the pattern repeated. Humans sacrificing themselves for others. "Every human grows up hearing these stories," Scott continued. "We know we're fragile. We know the universe can kill us easily. We evolved on a planet that actively tried to kill us through ice ages, volcanic eruptions, plagues, predators, and our own stupidity. We learned that humans can endure things that should wipe us out, if we work together and refuse to give up." Captain Morrison entered the room, looking tired but alert. He had been coordinating training exercises with other coalition species, trying to share human tactical knowledge. "So when you ask us to hold an impossible position or conduct a suicide mission," Morrison said, picking up the thread of conversation, "we don't see it as impossible. We see it as difficult. And humans have been doing difficult things since we figured out how to throw rocks at woolly mammoths that outweighed us by 10 tons. Zekthar listened to this explanation, processing the information. "You have built an entire culture around the expectation of sacrifice." "Not expectation," Roberts corrected. "Willingness. There's a difference. We don't expect our soldiers to die. We train them to survive. We give them the best equipment we can. We plan missions to minimize casualties. But we also accept that some situations require someone to stand in the gap, to hold the line, to buy time with their lives. And we honor that sacrifice by remembering them, by making sure their deaths accomplish something meaningful." He pulled up footage from recent battles. Zekthar saw humans fighting in situations that should have been hopeless, winning through determination and refusal to surrender. He saw wounded humans dragging their teammates to safety. He saw last stands where humans held positions against overwhelming odds, dying but not breaking. "The Vrath don't understand fear," Zekthar said slowly, working through his thoughts. "They are barely sentient, driven by biological programming to consume and spread. They cannot be intimidated or negotiated with. How do you fight an enemy that cannot be frightened into retreat?" Morrison smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "You out-stubborn them. The Vrath don't fear death because they don't really think. They just exist and consume. We don't fear death because we've already decided that some things are worth dying for. That makes us more dangerous than any mindless monster. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Every human soldier knows they might die. We accept that when we sign up. But we also know that our species has survived ice ages and plagues and wars and disasters that killed millions. We know that humans are resilient beyond reason. So when faced with something terrifying like the Wrath, we don't see unstoppable monsters. We see another challenge to overcome. Roberts added, and we have one advantage the Wrath will never have. We remember our dead. We tell their stories. We make sure their sacrifice means something. That gives us purpose beyond simple survival. We're fighting to protect what we've built, to honor those who fell before us, to ensure that future generations don't have to face what we're facing. Zekthar thought about the Chromath approach to war. His people valued glory in battle, honored warriors who died well, celebrated martial prowess. But they did not have this same deep cultural commitment to sacrifice for others. The Chromath fought for honor and duty. The humans fought for each other. At the Battle of Threshold Station, Zekthar said, Captain Morrison held position with 300 humans against 50,000 Wrath for 6 days. High Command had ordered evacuation. The station was considered indefensible. Yet he stayed. Because evacuating would have given the Wrath a strategic victory, Morrison replied. They would have used that station to launch attacks deeper into Coalition space. More people would have died. So we stayed, and we made them pay for every meter they took. And, when we finally had to leave, we made sure they couldn't use what we left behind. Roberts pulled up the casualty reports from Threshold Station. 247 humans died there. 247 lives, each one precious, each one mourned. But their stand gave the Coalition fleet time to regroup and counterattack. They saved millions of lives by spending their own. That is what humans do. We calculate the cost, and we pay it if the cause is worthy. The conversation continued for hours. Zekthar learned about human psychology, their history of survival against impossible odds, their cultural values that prized both individual achievement and collective sacrifice. He learned about their wars, their heroes, their failures and triumphs. By the end, he understood that humanity's strength was not physical. It was psychological and cultural. They had spent millions of years learning to survive in a hostile universe, then spent thousands of years fighting each other and learning from every conflict. They had developed warfare as an art form, turned stubbornness into a survival trait, and built entire societies around the idea that some things were worth dying for. You are terrifying, Zekthar told them honestly. Not because you are strong, but because you refuse to acknowledge when you should be defeated. That's the secret, Commander, Morrison said with a slight smile. Humans don't know how to quit. It's not in our nature. We'll find a way to win, or we'll die trying. But we will never just give up. The final assault on the Wrath homeworld required every ship and soldier the Coalition could spare. Intelligence called it the Nexus, a corrupted planet that served as the central breeding ground for the entire Wrath species. Scans showed the surface crawling with millions of warriors, the underground riddled with queen chambers that produced new swarms every day. If the Coalition could destroy the Nexus, they could win the war. If they failed, the Wrath would spread unchecked across the galaxy. High Command assembled the largest fleet in Coalition history. Warships from a dozen species, carrying ground forces numbering in the hundreds of thousands. The plan was straightforward. Orbital bombardment to weaken the surface defenses, followed by a ground assault to reach the deep underground chambers where the queens bred. It would be bloody. Everyone knew that. Humanity committed every able-bodied soldier they could spare. 12,000 troops, drawn from every human colony and station in Coalition space. It was a fraction of the total assault force, But Zekthar had learned not to measure humans by numbers alone. He requested they be assigned to the most critical assault points, the places where the fighting would be heaviest and the stakes highest. The bombardment began 2 days before the ground assault. Coalition ships hammered the Nexus from orbit, turning continents to glass with concentrated fire. Energy weapons carved burning scars across the planet's surface. Kinetic bombardment sent massive slugs of metal crashing down at relativistic speeds, creating explosions visible from space. The planet burned under the assault. But the Vrath Queens were buried deep, protected by kilometers of rock and organic matter that had grown over centuries. The bombardment could only do so much. Eventually, soldiers would have to go down there and finish the job. Zekthar led a mixed force into the underground warrens on the 3rd day. His command included Chromath warriors, Thraxian acid troops, Vulcan regenerators, and 500 human soldiers led by Captain Morrison. They descended through massive tunnels that the bombardment had opened, entering a world of darkness and death. The Vrath fought with desperate fury. They knew this was their extinction, and they battled for every meter of tunnel. The fighting was brutal and close, with no room for tactics or maneuver. Just raw combat in cramped spaces designed for alien anatomy. The coalition forces pushed forward through sheer determination, leaving their dead behind because there was no time to recover bodies. 5 kilometers down, the advance stalled. The tunnels narrowed, forcing troops to move in single file. The Vrath had prepared ambushes, collapsing tunnels behind the coalition forces and separating units from each other. Zekthar's force found themselves pinned down in a large chamber, taking fire from multiple directions, with Vrath reinforcements pouring in through passages too small for Chromath warriors to follow. The mission was failing. Zekthar could see it in the tactical displays, in the casualty reports streaming in the desperate calls for support from other units. They were taking too long, losing too many soldiers, and the Vrath seemed endless. Then Morrison contacted him on a private channel. "Commander, we've got an alternative route to the Queen Chambers. My scouts found it 20 minutes ago. It's not ideal." "Explain," Zekthar demanded, his voice tight with stress. "There's a magma channel that runs near the Queen Chambers, natural geological feature that the Vrath built around. We can use it to bypass their defenses. Our armor's environmental systems can handle it for maybe 30 minutes before we cook inside the suits. Long enough to reach the chambers, plant charges, and destroy the queens. Not long enough to get back out." Zekthar understood immediately. "That is suicide. Your soldiers will die from the heat, even if the Vrath do not kill them." "Yeah," Morrison agreed, his tone calm. "But it will work, and that's what matters, Commander. We can end this today if you let us." "I cannot order you to undertake a mission with no chance of survival," Zekthar said. Even as he said it, he knew it was a human argument, not a strategic one. As a commander, he should accept any tactic that achieved the objective. But something about sending the humans to certain death felt wrong. "You're not ordering us, Commander. We're volunteering. That's the difference." Morrison cut the connection before Zekthar could respond. On the tactical display, he watched as 300 human soldiers broke away from the main force and headed toward the magma channels. They moved with the same calm efficiency they brought to every mission, checking weapons, confirming communication links, preparing for what was coming. The channel was exactly as bad as Morrison described. The heat was visible on the thermal scans, temperatures that would melt most metals. The humans entered anyway, their armor's cooling systems screaming warnings that they ignored. Zekthar monitored their vital signs, watching as they slowly climbed into dangerous territory. One by one, the vital signs started to fail. Not from enemy action, but from the heat. The cooling systems could only do so much against temperatures designed to melt rock. The humans were being cooked alive inside their armor, but they kept moving forward. Private Daniel Lee was the first to fall. His cooling system failed completely, and his body temperature spiked to fatal levels within seconds. He managed to transmit his position data to the soldiers behind him before he died, giving them information to adjust their route. Sergeant Brenda Murphy lasted another 10 minutes before heat exhaustion claimed her. She used her last moments to place a guidance beacon, marking the best path forward for those following. The humans died by the dozen as they advanced through the magma channels, but they did not stop. Every fallen soldier transmitted data, placed markers, provided information that helped those behind them. They turned their deaths into tools, using their sacrifice to smooth the path for their teammates. Zekthar watched this horror unfold, unable to look away. He had seen sacrifice before. He had seen warriors die for their cause, but he had never seen anything like this. These humans knew with absolute certainty that they would die. Not might die, not probably die, but absolutely would die. And they went anyway, calm and professional, treating it as just another mission. Captain Morrison reached the first Queen Chamber with 47 soldiers still alive. They placed charges with expert precision, rigging the explosives to cause maximum structural damage. The Wrath tried to stop them, pouring warriors into the chamber, but the humans fought with the desperate strength of the dying. They knew they had minutes left at most, and they used those minutes efficiently. Morrison's voice came over the command channel, distorted by heat and failing equipment. First chamber rigged. Moving to chamber 2. 23 soldiers reached the second chamber. They fought through waves of wrath, their armor failing, their bodies shutting down from the heat. But still they fought. Still they moved forward. Still they completed the mission. Sergeant Katie Lewis was the last one alive. Her vital signs were critical. Her armor's integrity at 12%. Her body temperature far beyond safe limits. She reached the final Queen Chamber, planted the last charge, and triggered the sequence. Her final transmission was calm, professional, showing no fear or regret. Mission accomplished, Commander. All charges placed and armed. Detonation in 30 seconds. It's been an honor serving with you. The explosions were massive. 15 kilometers of tunnels collapsed, crushing 3 Queen Chambers and over 50,000 Wrath warriors. The shock wave traveled through the underground complex, destabilizing other sections. The Wrath defense collapsed as their command structure broke down. Coalition forces pressed the advantage. Within hours, they reached the remaining Queen Chambers and destroyed them. The Wrath fought with desperate fury, but without coordination, without new reinforcements being bred, they were just another enemy that could be defeated. The war ended that day. The Wrath Queens were dead, their warriors scattered and leaderless. Over the following weeks, Coalition forces hunted down the remaining Wrath populations and eliminated them. The galaxy breathed a collective sigh of relief. The nightmare was over. But the cost was staggering. Humanity had committed 12,000 soldiers to the final assault. 4,000 died in the fighting, including the 300 who went into the magma channels. A third of humanity's entire military force gone in a single battle. Zekthar stood before the memorial wall days later. Names were engraved on it, thousands upon thousands of names, representing every species that had fought and died in the war. The human section was heartbreakingly long. Admiral Roberts stood beside him, looking at the names with tired eyes. "We'll remember them. Every name, every story. That's the deal we make with our soldiers. Die for us, and we'll make sure you're never forgotten. We'll tell your story. We'll honor your sacrifice. We'll make sure it meant something." "Your species is terrifying," Zekthar said quietly. "You face monsters by being willing to become something more dedicated than they are. Not in cruelty or evil, but in absolute determination to complete the mission regardless of cost. Roberts considered this. Maybe, but I prefer to think we face monsters by being willing to be human. Fragile, mortal, and absolutely unwilling to quit. That's our strength, Commander. We know we can die. We just don't let that stop us from doing what's necessary. He pointed to the names on the wall. Katie Lewis knew she would die in that magma tunnel. Every single soldier who went down there knew they wouldn't come back. But they also knew their sacrifice would win the war, would save billions of lives across the galaxy. So they went. Not because they wanted to die, but because they wanted others to live. Zekthar ran his hand across the engraved names, feeling the letters carved deep into the metal. The Vrath were monsters, true horrors that consumed worlds. We fought them for 300 cycles before humanity joined the war. In 3 years, humans helped us end it. We're good at war, Roberts admitted. We've had a lot of practice, but we're better at sacrifice. We understand that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to stand between it and danger, knowing you might not survive. That's not monster behavior, Commander. That's human behavior. Years later, when other species asked Zekthar about humans, about what made them such effective warriors despite their physical limitations, he would tell them about Katie Lewis dying in a lava tunnel, about Carl Brooks detonating a grenade while pinned by a Vrath warrior, about 300 humans walking knowingly into hell because the mission required it. They're not monsters, he would say. They're something far more dangerous than that. They're human, and humans don't surrender. They don't give up. They don't stop fighting until either they win or there's nothing left of them to fight. You don't want them as enemies because they will never quit. But if you're fortunate enough to have them as allies, treasure them. Because when the universe throws its worst at you, humans will stand beside you and smile and tell you that they've survived worse. Not that they were fearless, but that they fought anyway. Not that they were unkillable, but that they refused to stay down. Not that they were monsters, but that they were so thoroughly, stubbornly, impossibly human that even the monsters of the galaxy could not stop them. The war was over. The Vrath were extinct, and the galaxy had learned a lesson that Zekthar would carry for the rest of his life. Never underestimate humanity. Never assume that physical strength is the only kind that matters. And never ever bet against a species too stubborn to know when they should quit.